All right, we do have a lot of content to get through, so I am going to get us started now. My name is Stacey De Colomer and I'm the Executive Director for Sector Workforce Planning and Development here at the Queensland Council of Social Service, or QCOSS as you probably know us. And so it's a real pleasure to be facilitating the session today. Workforce, attraction, retention and all things related to workforce are of great interest to our team here at QCOSS and for me especially in my role. So it's a real pleasure to be here. Thanks for joining us. Now, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on the land of the Yagara and Turrbal people. I'd like to pay my respect to their elders, past and present. I'd like to acknowledge their continuing connection to this place and their ongoing contributions to this community. I'd like to pay my respects to the elders of the lands that you're all on today, and I'd like to encourage you to acknowledge the land that you're coming from in the chat so that we can see the spread of nations of the land that we're all on today across Queensland. Okay, a little bit of housekeeping for the session. If you could keep yourself on mute, that's really helpful so that we don't have background noise. We are recording the session today, and so you will receive a post-event email which will contain the slides, recording, all kinds of things that you would like to receive after a session like this. So you will have quite a lot of comprehensive information in it. So don't worry too much about taking lots of notes because you will receive all of that. So it's nice to be able to sit back and really listen to the information being shared. Now, this session today is part 4 of a 5-part series. So we're near to the end, but as you might have just heard me say before, all the content from the previous sessions are online, so you can catch up on our website. The session today is all about creating a healthy, confident and stable team through leadership. And this is a content area that's especially close to my heart because we work really closely with organisations and often see the effect of leadership, whether that's positive or negative impact that has on teams within organisations. And we see that out in the sector, and I'm sure you've all experienced it, as I have, that in your own careers, how much of an impact leadership can really have on a way a team works together and that overall culture of organisation. And that has a huge effect on how we're able to attract and retain workforce. I know many of the interviews that I've conducted over the last 12 months, one of the most common questions that I get asked from candidates is, what is it like to work at your workplace? What's it like to work there? What are the people like? What's the supervision like? So workers now are really clued in to the fact that leadership has a huge impact on what their experience will be like in the workplace. So this is such an important topic and one that we're really pleased to be unpacking today. Now, I'd like to thank the Department of Employment, Small Business and Training, who have funded this program through their Growing Workforce Participation Fund. It's been a really great experience for us to be able to present this series and put together this content. We'd like to thank them for their funding to enable us to do that. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Lisa Stockwell, who's going to be presenting the information about the overall content today. And the second half of the session, we're going to be joined by panelists who will share their experiences and dive in some practical ways that managers can support their teams, and particularly employees who may have diverse needs. So over to you, Lisa. Lisa's from Kanban HR Consulting, who's going to be delivering the first part of this session. Now, Lisa is the principal consultant of Kanban HR Consulting, and she's the lead facilitator of a boutique DEI training and consulting company. She's got more than 25 years of experience, and Lisa's really driven by the importance of diversity, equity and inclusion in workplaces to enable leaders and teams to provide the best service they can to their clients. And that's certainly something we're very interested in supporting organisations to do. All right, over to you, Lisa.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Stacey. So today we will be exploring how we're going to be creating these healthy, confident and stable teams through leadership. And we'll be doing this by looking at 5 different areas. And you've got those on the screen there for you. So let's jump straight into that first one, employee well-being. It's really important to recognise that managers have just as much of an impact on people's mental health as that person's spouse. and even more impact than a person's doctor or therapist. I mean, this is a really substantial amount of influence that a manager has over an individual's life. For a long time, we've actually thought it was a good thing to pay attention to people's differences. Where are you from? What's your background? Where's that accent from? Those sort of things. What we actually now know is that this can actually increase a person's sense of exclusion, of being different. We actually have a lot more in common than we do being different. For example, everyone wants to feel respected and valued, to have a sense of purpose, and to make meaningful connections. Leading Australian psychologist Dr. Peter Cotton found that more than 50% of our wellbeing at work can be attributed to the quality of the relationship we have with our line manager. And this is the largest protective factor for our wellbeing. The second most significant factor is actually having supportive relationships with your team members. In fact, supportive leadership factors and the quality of team-based climate regularly explains around 30% of bottom line financial performance or service delivery. This has a significant commercial impact for a business. So employees who feel that strong sense of belonging significantly perform higher or better. They have much fewer sick days, actually 75% fewer sick days on average, and the turnover risk is going to be vastly different as well compared to those employees who don't have that same sense of belonging. What's really important to notice is that researchers have found just a single incident of a micro-exclusion can lead to an immediate 25% decline in individuals' performance on a team project. I mean, that's a huge figure. Now, the relatively recent advent of MRIs has allowed scientists to research the brain in new ways. For example, functional MRIs have found that the same part of the brain is activated when we're feeling excluded or when we're feeling in physical pain. Our brains don't actually distinguish between the two. Now, we also know that people won't speak up at work by voicing their opinion or being involved in decision making if they don't feel it's psychologically safe to do so. And this has some pretty serious implications for businesses. As we've just talked about, that low psychological safety leads to higher staff turnover, higher absenteeism, and a higher rate of safety-related incidents occurring. So what do we actually mean by psychosocial hazards? Psychosocial hazards are now explicitly considered work health and safety hazards. And this means employers have a legal responsibility to ensure that they're being effectively managed before they happen. And it's critical to keep in mind that these psychosocial hazards can also come from third parties, such as your customers or clients. Now, there are a lot of psychosocial hazards, and many of them are related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And we've got a long, long list of just some of what those would look like here on the screen for you. So some of them are pretty obvious. You think of bullying, harassment, and sexual harassment, you think of victimization, but you don't necessarily think of communication barrier as a psychosocial hazard. But if you think about if you're someone where English might not be your first language, whether that was you're born in a different country or sign language is your first language, living in a world where communication, you're expected that a high level of English is your first language can be enormously isolating. Being an only, if you're the only woman in a team, the only gay person in a team, the only black person in a team, again, that's a very isolating experience. We're going to have a look at some of these in a little bit more detail on the next slide. Now, this graphic was produced by WorkSafe Queensland, and it illustrates that the psychosocial hazards can come from 4 different areas, not just those interpersonal interactions. So what do we mean by these from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective? Well, if we start at that top circle, design or management of work, that's where it's going to be things like you might have inconsiderate or unsupportive supervision from your manager. Maybe the reward and recognition practices aren't particularly equitable. There might be an inconsistency of applied procedures. Some rules for some people, different rules for others. A lack of agreed procedures on how to deal with workplace complaints. Maybe there's unclear or unfair processes for performance appraisal. Workplace interactions and behaviours, well, they're the ones that we typically think about. Harassment, bullying, it could even be violence, just interpersonal conflict, or maybe just poor relationships. And as I said earlier, that's not just internal, that can also come from suppliers, from customers, from other external stakeholders as well. Now, plant, you think, how does that relate as a psychosocial hazard? Well, it might be that your IT systems aren't actually accessible to all. Maybe you don't have, screen reader technology available, for example. Or maybe the tools and machinery that your team members need to use have been built for the average male rather than a more inclusive design. Work environment. Is the person working in social or physical isolation? Or again, are there some inconsistently applied procedures happening? Just like we would with a physical risk, we need to be using a risk assessment matrix for psychosocial hazards so we can work out how to eliminate that hazard or, as far as reasonably practicable, minimise it. The risk assessment matrix is the same regardless of whether it is a psychosocial hazard or a physical hazard. First of all, can this be eliminated? If you can't eliminate that risk, can you substitute, isolate, or use engineering controls to manage it? If not, can you use administrative controls, so policies and procedures? And the last resort really is personal protective equipment. Now, of course, any of these things, as you can see, can lead to a stress response in an individual. And when we're exposed to that stress, that adrenaline and cortisol for a long period of time, then that's when we start to see some significant harm being done, both psychologically or physically. A key psychosocial hazard is sexual harassment, and it's specifically listed now as a psychosocial hazard. The Sex Discrimination Act was introduced 40 years ago, and yet sexual harassment is still an insidious aspect of many women's workplace experiences. Sexual harassment goes hand in hand with bullying, intimidation, and discrimination on the ground of gender. Indeed, where women report higher levels of one of these behaviours, they typically report higher levels of the others as well. In 2024, we still have this issue. In the most recent analysis done by WGEA, 98.5%, so just about everyone, of organisations with more than 100 employees have a sexual harassment policy. But it's just clearly not working. The ABS reports that in the last 12 months, of the 9.9 million adult women living in this country, 1.3 million of us experience sexual harassment. Compare this to just 400,000 men. Not that that's a good figure either. 97% of these women were harassed by a male. Men were about as likely to experience sexual harassment by a male as by a female. And the likelihood of being sexually harassed is significantly higher if you're born overseas, if you're a person of colour, you have a disability, you're under the age of 24, or you live in a household that experiences financial stress, or if you're not heteronormative. In fact, nearly 50% of migrant and refugee women have experienced at least one form of sexual harassment in the workplace in the last 5 years. And 99% of non-binary people report being harassed at work. So I want you to think about the composition of your workforce. How many of your employees are female? How many were born overseas? How many of them are women of colour? And so on. You probably have a significant problem and don't realise it. Just having a policy and doing the occasional bit of training is just not enough. Now, we could run a whole session just on how to comply with the new legislation, but that's not the focus of today's session. The Respect at Work Act was introduced in December 2022. And the upshot of the Respect at Work Act is that every organisation now has a legal responsibility to do this. What's on the screen? It is no longer enough to just respond to sexual harassment, sex discrimination, or victimisation. You must proactively prevent it. Now, the Respect at Work Act also resulted in changes to the Work Health and Safety Act. And as we've talked about, from the work health and safety perspective, you've got that positive duty to take reasonable and proportionate action to eliminate, or as far as practicable, minimise psychosocial hazards in the workplace. And this does include from clients and other third parties. Sexual harassment and psychosocial hazards are now explicitly considered those work health and safety hazards, which means that PCBUs, managers basically, have a legal responsibility to ensure that psychosocial hazards at work are effectively managed. Now, if you have a culture of active bystanders or upstanders, this is a key part in managing this. Our small interactions with colleagues have a big impact on our well-being. Casual comments, actions and assumptions that are rooted in bias are common occurrences for people from underrepresented groups, and these can be disrespectful and stressful. Women of colour, LGBTQI+ women, and women with disabilities are more likely to experience these microaggressions and are actually 3 times more likely to think about leaving their job as a result. Now, microaggressions are as they sound, very small aggressions. They're the everyday slights, insults, put downs, and offensive behaviours that people of underrepresented groups experience in daily interactions, often with generally well-intentioned white Australians who might be unaware that they've engaged in demeaning ways towards target groups. In addition to being communicated on this interpersonal level, microaggressions may also be delivered environmentally through social media, education curriculum, TV programs, mascots, or other offensive symbols. The totality of these environmental microaggressions can actually create quite a hostile and invalidating societal climate in employment, education, and healthcare. Now, you would dismiss just one microaggression, but when you are consistently on the receiving end, that sense of not being valued, of not being seen, of being disrespected or harassed, it builds and it builds, forming a significant psychosocial hazard. Constantly battling microaggressions has actually been found to impede learning and problem solving, and it has a significant impact on mental health outcomes. One study conducted in 2016 actually found that over 75% of African Americans experience daily racism, ranging from microaggressions like these ones through to overt discrimination and harassment. And here's a few more examples for you as well. Now, I've worked, as you've probably heard in previous presentations, I've done a lot of time in law firms. I can remember working with one law firm partner who would say good morning to the lawyers, but not the support staff. Or the male engineer that would only greet the other male engineers, not the female ones. Telling someone that their name is too difficult or giving them a nickname. Now, quite honestly, if we can all learn how to pronounce Schwarzenegger and Palaszczuk, I think there's some other names that we can learn to pronounce as well. Inaccessible meetings. Think about where you're holding some of these meetings. Are they being held after hours? Are they being held in pubs? Maybe somewhere like Tats. Maybe they're very loud or poorly lit locations, or they've got stairs. Just because it's accessible for you doesn't mean it's accessible for everyone. Now, the antidote to microaggressions, of course, is microaffirmations. Now, none of these are difficult to do, but they will make your team members feel seen and valued. And quite honestly, they are things that we should be doing every day. In many cases, bias and discrimination go unchallenged because the behaviours and the words are disguised in ways that provide cover for their expression or the belief that they are harmless and insignificant. We can tackle microaggressions through micro-interventions. And micro-interventions are those everyday words or deeds that communicate to targets a validation of their experience, that they are valued as a person. It provides them with support and encouragement and reassurance that they're not alone. Now, these interventions actually have a profound positive effect in creating that inclusive and welcoming environment, discouraging that negative behaviour and reinforcing a culture that values respectful interventions. And of course, interactions. We've talked about in the past, when people are feeling valued and respected, then that's when they're going to be doing their best work. And the productivity and the profitability of those organisations is substantially higher. Not addressing a microaggression when that occurs will actually indicate that you condone or you even agree with the behaviour or comments. So there's 3 different ways that you can tackle them. The first one is to make the invisible visible. Often the perpetrator is unaware that they've engaged in demeaning or offensive comments. So make that visible to them. Let me give you an example. You might have a white Australian nursing manager who says to a 3rd generation Asian Australian nursing graduate, "You speak excellent English." The subtext of this, of course, is that you're an alien in your own country. You're not a true Australian. And the graduate could respond by saying, "Thank you, I hope so. I was born here." The second one is educating the perpetrator. So shift that focus from what the person has intended to the impact. You will always lose the argument if you're trying to prove intent because you can't. So focus on the impact of what was said or done. So, for example, you might have a new nursing assistant from Colombia, and one of your colleagues says, "Well, better not let her near the meds. You know what Colombians are like with drugs." And you might reply, "That's a pretty unfair stereotype you're using. How would you feel if someone assumed something negative about you because of your nationality?" And finally, disarm the microaggression. Steer that conversation away from the problematic remark or joke to communicate that it's offensive. You'll be modelling good behaviour to the people present, and if you need to or want to, you can then have a later conversation with that person about why their joke or comment was inappropriate. You can express disagreement with what was said, or state your values, or interrupt and redirect that conversation. So, for example, a colleague says, "Well, Sarah only got that job because of her disability." You could push back with anything from, "Ooh, really?" Or, "That's not how I view it," or, "I just don't agree with you on that." Let's turn now and have a look at allyship. Allyship is an active and consistent effort to use your privilege and your power to support and advocate for people with less privilege. What is privilege? Well, that's the unearned advantage we get from being part of a dominant group whose needs have traditionally been prioritised. The thing is, most of us who have that privilege don't actually identify ourselves as being privileged. So what do I mean by that? Well, as I pop these questions up on the screen, just think to yourself, do I answer yes to these or no? If you answer yes to most of these questions, then you have unearned advantages that aren't actually held by everyone. And you can use this privilege to be an ally for others. Even if you're not in a management or a leadership role, you have more power than you think. Do you organise meetings? Well, give input on who should be invited as well as when and where the meeting is being held. Do you attend meetings? Well, speak up when someone's being interrupted, or when someone's idea is misappropriated, or just give credit where it's due. Do you have input in screening CVs or interviewing candidates? Well, demand a diverse candidate pool from HR in the first place. Identify the selection criteria before reviewing any of the CVs or candidates and mark according to that criteria. Do you have a role that others may aspire to? Well, be a mentor, and that might be internal or external. If you give input into team social events or conferences, well, ask if the venue and the timing is accessible for all. Do you write or review job descriptions? Well, make sure you're considering the gender equitable guidelines for writing job descriptions. Challenge whether the role actually does need to be full-time. That's always our default position. What is the actual criteria for the role? What are the KPIs for that role? And when was the last time it was reevaluated? Do you participate in casual conversations at work? Well, I think we all do that. Advocate for others in these conversations. Make it clear that you won't tolerate casual racism, sexism, or other discrimination in these conversations. And finally, do you interact with people of influence in your organisation? Or use that opportunity to speak up on DEI issues with them? And here's a few more ways that you can be an ally at work. Advocate for others. Become an ally both inside and outside your organisation and shine that spotlight on other people's achievements and contributions. Interestingly, not only is it great for them, but it makes you look good too. Share opportunities. Recognise when underrepresented groups remain underrepresented. If you've been asked to speak at a conference, offer to give up your speaking spot if the organisers haven't included a diverse panel of speakers. Likewise, ask your procurement team to make sure that diversity is included as one of their ESG requirements. Recognise and challenge the systemic inequity. Systemic discrimination filters down through all aspects of society, and it has been centuries in the making and will take a really sustained effort over time to dismantle. So we really need to focus on this challenge to make that systemic shift. Themed cupcakes are not going to be your answer. Actually listen to other people's experiences and try to see each other's reality. We can't greet the trauma experienced from racist or gendered violence and discrimination with silence, because silence, at its best, gives the impression of indifference. For someone who is, say, the only Black person on the team, the perceived indifference can increase feelings of isolation. Be prepared to really engage and listen to the lived experience of people from different ethnic backgrounds, especially to identify the barriers to entry and progression in your organisation. Don't scatter minorities through your organisation like glitter. One woman in that team, one coloured person in that team. No one wants to be an only, or even worse, a double only. If you've just recruited 2 male nurses, for example, put them in the same team. Offer your support wherever possible. Join or help set up employee resource groups to support your organisation's employees. At an organisational level, include case studies on your website. And finally, interrupt discrimination. Knock down those structural and procedural barriers. Change structures that constrain innovation and change. Are there new entry routes that need to be created for members of underrepresented groups, such as apprenticeships or work trials? Really be receptive to different ways that might be able to break down some silos and create new career opportunities. Okay, now related to being an ally is being a bystander, particularly an active bystander, or even better, an upstander. Being an active bystander and upstander is really key in challenging inappropriate behaviour and reducing the impact on victims. It plays a significant role in upholding the attitudes, societal norms, and behaviours that underpin our culture. Now, while there's no one way to act as a bystander because every situation is unique, there are factors that will influence whether a bystander will take action to become an active bystander. For example, if the perpetrator is senior to you or physically bigger than you, or if you're new to the organisation or the country, or maybe you're a casual employee, then it's really unlikely you're going to speak up. The structure within your organisation is another key factor. Does your organisation have a culture that promotes psychological safety, of being able to safely speak up? Alinta Energy, for example, actually has a culture of the campaign, called Say It Again. So all employees are really encouraged whenever something inappropriate is said or done, that they can say it again, to make people just take that moment of, ooh, what have I just said? Do you have a culture that protects some but not others? Or, can you be known to shoot the messenger? One organisation I was at had a team referred to as Lone Pine. They were a protected species. To be an effective bystander, you need to educate yourself. You need to understand those various forms of discrimination and injustice so you can then recognise them when they occur. You need to trust your instincts. If something feels wrong and unjust, it probably is. Trust your gut and assess that situation. If you intervene, of course, it needs to be done safely. So step in to support or address a situation, but prioritise your safety and the safety of others. Make sure you're using your voice to speak up against discrimination or injustice, even when it feels uncomfortable. Trust me, the more you do it, the more comfortable you'll become doing it. And it also shows other people that it's okay to do that as well. Offer support by showing empathy and support to people who are feeling or who are being targeted or marginalised. Sometimes you might just need to create a distraction. So distract from the harmful situation that's happening or to diffuse the tension to prevent escalation. And sometimes we just need to seek help. Maybe we need to get assistance from others because it's too much to handle alone, or we might not be the right person to be intervening at that point in time. Of course, you need to be listening actively to people who are on the receiving end of these things. And you need to continue that reflecting and learning journey as well. So you can continue to improve your effectiveness as an active bystander or an upstander. Being an upstander is more than being an active bystander. You really are being anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-ableist, and taking those actions. Okay, finally, let's have a look at the structural initiatives your organisation can take. The first one is choosing where to focus your DEIB investments. Now, migrant workers are a hidden workforce and their issues are not represented and they are underutilised. In fact, a recent study by the Queensland Government found that there are currently more than 6,000 underutilised migrants and refugees in Queensland that have skills aligned with current skills shortages. The disability workforce, people with a disability aged between 15 and 24 are more likely to be underemployed by 23%. And we know that employees with a disability typically have a longer tenure with an organisation than employees without a disability. We also know that for every dollar invested by an organisation in reasonable accommodations, employers actually reap a $40 saving. And finally, this is the community services sector, and it's not mirroring the community sector. It's not mirroring its customer base with regards to disability. DEIB committees. Your committees cannot act in isolation of the business strategy and the organisation's leadership team. You need clear lines of communication, responsibility and accountability between your DEI committee, the executive team and the board if you have one. So it's essential for it to be a part of the organisation's DNA. As such, and I've said this a few times, as has Christine, DEI cannot be the responsibility of the HR team, although HR will play a key role in the implementation of many of the employment policies and processes required as part of good DEI practices. Do you remember a number of years back, not too many, we had Prime Minister Tony Abbott, who appointed himself the Minister for Women's Issues. Well, that's no different from having a DEI committee comprised of just the dominant group. White, middle-aged women from HR does not cut it for your DEI committee. So you really need to be making sure that you're clear of what the main functions of your DEI committee is, to really make sure that's going to be embedded into that DNA of your organisation. Employee resource groups are typically voluntary, identity-based community groups formed by employees in a company. And they exist for various purposes, but most of all, they aim to give employees a safe space to connect and to raise awareness about issues facing their community. They are not there to make sure that there are rainbow cupcakes for Pride Day or to create division by highlighting the differences between members of that ERG and non-members. It is also not the responsibility of women and minority groups to fix DEI in their organisations. ERGs typically form for underrepresented groups, and they cannot be expected to shoulder the burden of educating and changing the perspectives of an entire workforce. They need to make sure that they are trying to accurately represent the diverse client base of the community services sector, advocating for leadership that mirrors the diversity to ensure decisions reflect the needs of both the clients and your employees. You need to make sure that they're being empowered, really helping to participate in the shaping of policies and practices to be culturally responsive and inclusive, and making sure that all voices are being heard and considered in decision-making processes. When the C-suite and other leaders back up your employee resource groups, your company culture actually becomes stronger. I would recommend, if you're large enough, to actually establish an ERG council, which is comprised of the chair of each of your ERGs and their executive sponsors that then meet, say, on a quarterly basis to align themselves on the goals and the strategies for each group in a powerful way to maintain that buy-in, as well as keeping a strong link to the business objectives. Make sure that each ERG actually has a budget to help them achieve their goals, as well as some access to internal resources such as marketing, HR, and communications. Your ERG leaders should develop strategies for their community based on insights gleaned from community-specific engagement survey results, and then link these back to business objectives. And those results should be shared on a regular basis. Make sure you're providing your ERG leaders with access to management and leadership courses, and recognise the contribution that they are making to the organisation. It's above and beyond their full-time role. Now, ERG leaders are at higher risk of burnout because of this additional workload, so actually make sure that the role is factored into their recognised work responsibilities and pay an additional loading to your ERG leaders. Encourage employees wanting to learn more to attend ERG events and meetings to gain other people's perspectives. For example, heterosexual or cisgender employees may want to show allyship to co-workers by attending a Pride ERG event or meeting. If you have collaboration between your ERGs, it actually will allow for an intersectional approach to be taken, as well as allowing for other benefits, such as gaining a larger audience and the sharing of workloads. Strong and regular communication between ERGs is essential, as well as with the broader organisation and community. I think I've said this in every presentation so far. DEI is not the responsibility of your human resources team. It needs to be an integral part of the organisation, just like providing customer service or managing expenses. It's a non-negotiable part of running the business. What gets measured gets managed. The sponsorship of DEI by senior leaders ensures that DEI is integrated into those core strategic goals of the organisation, facilitating the allocation of necessary resources, the budget, the time, the personnel, to really make sure that you've got support for your DEI initiatives. Leaders also need to walk the talk. They set the tone for the organisation culture, and their active participation in DEI initiatives models the behaviour and the attitudes expected throughout the organisation, promoting that culture of inclusion and respect. And finally, with the backing of senior leadership, your DEI efforts are more likely to be sustainable and woven into the fabric of the organisation. Leadership can establish accountability mechanisms, ensuring that continuous progress and long-term commitment to your DEI goals. I'll now hand back over to Stacey, who will introduce you to our expert panel.
Thanks very much, Lisa. A lot there for us to think about. I particularly like your last comments about ensuring that these responsibilities and the accountability for diversity, equity, inclusion across our organisations are woven through the organisation through various mechanisms rather than resting on a single person or team's shoulders in the organisation, which we know does often happen. And I'm sure you've seen that happen a lot yourself. So thank you very much. A lot there for all of us to consider. Now, we do have some wonderful panellists joining us today. Now, if you do have any questions for Lisa, really happy for you to pop comments or questions in the chat and we can come back to those. And in the meantime, we will move over to our panel. Now, we have, unfortunately, one of our panellists who's on the screen there, Ryan, isn't able to join us today. So we've got the 3 other panellists. Luckily for us, they are fantastic panellists with a lot to share. So we've still got a full session for all of you. Now, I'm going to introduce each of them because they've got a great range of expertise behind them, and then we'll move into some questions. If you think of any questions for our panellists as they're speaking, really happy for you to put them into the chat and we'll do our best to come back to them. Okay, so first we've got Dr. Ignacio Correa Velez. Ignacio has a background in family medicine and public health. Since the early 2000s, Ignacio has focused his academic work in researching health, wellbeing and settlement experiences of people from refugee and migrant backgrounds in Australia. Other research interests include mental health, social determinants of health, diversity, inclusion and belonging, human rights. And between February 2019 and January 2022, Ignacio was the co-CEO of the Queensland Program of Assistance to Survivors of Torture and Trauma, QPAST. I hope many of you have heard of this wonderful organisation. He is currently a senior lecturer and an undergraduate public health course coordinator in the School of Public Health and Social Work at QUT. So welcome to you, Ignacio. We've also got Jenny Walk here today. Jenny is a proud First Nations Bundjalung woman from the Northern Rivers of New South Wales. She's the founder of Elephant in the Room Consulting, First Nations Events, Indigimesh, and co-founder of the Bee Impact Collective. So a very busy woman. Jenny is an experienced Indigenous engagement consultant with over 25 years of experience and expertise in leadership development, capability development, business strategy, coaching, and facilitation. And she's a program design and diagnostic assessment specialist and a performance and process coach, and brings a wealth of experience regarding strategy, policy design, capability development, and working with Indigenous peoples and organisations. Jenny works with businesses and leaders to understand how they work and develop strategies to solve complex problems through new and innovative solutions. Welcome to you, Jenny. And finally, we have Lucretia. Now, Lucretia Major is a proud Kalkadoon and Mikadukudi woman from Northwest Queensland, and Lucretia has worked within the not-for-profit social service sector and the community-controlled sector for over 10 years in finance, HR, and administrative-related roles. And I can back that up because Lucretia used to work at QCOS, which is how I know her. So it's always a pleasure to get Lucretia back to engage in different events with us. So Lucretia holds a Bachelor of Commerce and she's currently studying to become a chartered accountant. She has a strong desire and is determined to enhance finance, HR and governance areas within our sector, specifically the financial literacy and developing recruitment and retention strategies that ensure Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples continue to thrive. That's really, really important work. Thanks so much for joining us, Lucretia. Now, I'm going to start with you, Lucretia. Each organisation has a different approach when it comes to supporting employee engagement and wellbeing. So what are some of the ways that the Queensland Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Child Protection Peak, QATSIP, support employee wellbeing?
Thanks, Stacey. So good morning, everyone. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm calling in today, the Turrbal and Yagara people. I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I also extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are present here today. We recognise and honour the enduring connection to land, water and culture and acknowledge the rich history and traditions of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and communities. So I'm Lucretia Major, a proud Kalkadoon and Midikudi woman and the Finance and HR Manager at QATSIP. I'm honoured to be here today to discuss a topic that is incredibly important to me and my organisation, employee wellbeing. So at QATSIP, we believe that the foundation of a successful and thriving team lies in fostering a healthy, confident and stable environment through effective leadership. At QATSIP, we have implemented various things to contribute to employee wellbeing, including wellness programs, flexible work arrangements and a safe working environment. Firstly, we understand that a healthy team is a productive team. We offer comprehensive wellness programs that include gym membership contribution, access to an employee assistance program for our staff and their family members and household members, and also a regular fruit delivery each week. So these initiatives help our employees maintain their physical health and manage stress. QATSIP's office is designed to promote wellbeing with ample spaces for social interaction and yarning. So we conduct quarterly happiness checks through anonymous surveys to gauge and address any areas of concern, ensuring our workplace remains a supportive environment. So recognising the importance of work-life balance, we provide flexible working hours and remote work options. This flexibility helps our employees manage their personal commitments, reduces stress and fosters a healthier and more motivated workforce, which leads to a healthy work-life balance for our staff members. We proactively support staff initiatives by allowing the time, financial contribution and resources to do things outside of our standard work. So including a Deadly Date Squad, who organises various events to remember, acknowledge and educate our workforce on a range of diverse topics, as well as supporting our team to participate in the annual corporate games event where our teams played netball against a range of organisations. And or arranging a family fun day for our staff and their families to connect with each other over food, games, yarns, and good times. We invest in our employees' growth through continuous learning opportunities. This includes attending conferences, communities of practice, training programs, workshops, and mentorship opportunities. By supporting their professional development, we ensure they feel confident in their skills and career progression. We prioritise creating an inclusive environment where everyone feels valued and heard. By embracing diversity, we encourage open communication. We build a workplace where confidence can flourish. We strive to create a culturally safe space in all aspects of our work. This includes starting meetings with acknowledgement to country, getting input from First Nation staff on decisions with cultural implications, and holding group discussions after significant events like the Voice referendum. These practices ensure that our staff are respected and included, which is crucial for our stability. We provide a supportive work environment where people of all roles can contribute to discussions and provide feedback. This inclusive approach encourages continuous improvement and ensures that everyone's voice is heard. We maintain transparent communication channels, regularly checking in with anonymous surveys to address any concerns. This clarity helps reduce uncertainty and build trust, which is essential in a stable work environment. So with all that being said, over the past 5 years, QATSIP has experienced phenomenal growth, forcing us to change our formerly organic and flexible approach to employee wellbeing to one that is more structured and intentional. So continuous improvement is at the forefront of our employee wellness initiatives, as these aspects are not without its learning and opportunities. We are committed to creating environments where our team members feel valued, respected, safe, and have development opportunities that enhance their overall wellbeing in the workplace. So in conclusion, at QATSIP, we are committed to supporting employee wellbeing by creating a healthy, confident, and stable team. Through our comprehensive wellness programs, professional development opportunities, inclusive culture, clear communication, and supportive leadership, we strive to cultivate an environment where our employees can thrive both personally and professionally. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share our approach to employee wellbeing.
Thanks to you, Lucretia. Thanks very much. I love the idea of the netball tournament. That's a great one. And look, I think your comment there about really needing to respond to growth and needing more structure rather than a more organic approach to staff wellbeing is one that many community organisations that really resonates with a lot of community organisations. It's very tricky to adapt to that kind of growth and to know, sometimes we do things and we do it well, but we're not quite sure exactly what it is that are the enablers and what is it about what we do that is good. And then when we need to apply it to a much larger group, that's where things can start to fall down because we don't really have the scaffolding in place. And also sometimes, that connect between leadership and those working in direct supervision of employees too. So some really good points there and something for us to think about a little more. Now, if you have any questions or comments for Lucretia, please put them in the chat, flagging there that there's one there for you, Lisa from Bonnie. I'm going to move on to our next panelist, Ignacio. In the diverse environments in which we all live and work, ensuring the workplace is culturally safe is really important. It ensures that all the workers feeling comfortable, supported and respected. So how can organisations prioritise this in their own workplaces?
Thank you, Stacey, and good morning, everyone. And let me also acknowledge the Turrbal and Jagera as the First Nations owners of these lands where we live and work, and also acknowledge that for thousands of years they have been places of community and leadership. And thank you, Lisa, as well, and Lucrecia for their insightful presentations. And Lisa, when you were giving the example of a Colombian person, I relate totally to that. I am originally from Colombia. I have been here for 28 years. I have faced those comments many times, sadly, in all environments, in the public, in shopping centers, but also at work environments, including universities as well. So I know the feeling of that. And I have to say that sometimes is probably more painful when you see your children who were born here facing the same kind of comments and questions in different settings. So that's an ongoing issue that I know that impacts on many people. So
one of my work colleagues is Colombian, and she moved out when she was 2, so she has no accent or anything. But when she started work, she was called Snowflake, which apparently was a drug reference. That's
right. So anyway, it's just an example of the issue that many people face. And so look, I'm talking from my experience in my personal experience as well as being from culturally and linguistically diverse background, living in a country in a different kind of dominant culture, but also my experience as an academic teaching young professionals, health professionals, future health professionals, future leaders in the country as well, and also working as a leader in the NGO sector. And I like to use more like a public health and human rights lens to approach this issue, because in public health, we talk a lot about the broader determinants of health, the socio-ecological model of health, where we look at individual issues in a community, a family, a community, and then the broader society. And we talk about the upstream, midstream, and downstream determinants of health and well-being. And I think this is an issue of well-being. So if we focus initially on at the individual level, as a person then working in an environment, sometimes as a leader, but sometimes as a part of a team, of course, I think it's important to be a reflective person. So it's reflecting, and I think it was mentioned before, but that issue of you need to really reflect on your own culture. You need to reflect on your own biases, on your privilege, as Lisa mentioned. And importantly, on my plural identities, because sometimes we try to reduce people to a single identity. You know, this person is a Muslim, this person is a Colombian, this person is a Black person. And it doesn't acknowledge that we all hold plural identities, that a single identity is not who I am, and that we move across these plural identities all the time, depending on the different settings and interactions. So I think that continuous reflection of my plural identities is vital to understand the plural identities of others. And then as a person, how do I support an organization an organizational culture that fosters that fosters a reflective environment where people are continuously reflecting on their own biases and privilege and plural identities. The other issue is about my rights, because we live in a very individualistic society where my rights sometimes are more important than the rights of the person next to me. And within a human rights lens, that is not the case. It's my rights stop when the rights of the person next to me, the rights of my colleague, start. So we need to be mindful of that. My rights are not more important than the rights of the person next to me. But we need to acknowledge that there is tension in rights, in terms of human rights. And we see all the time this issue between my right to having a religion with a specific values and the rights of other people that do not share those values as well. So there are tensions there as well. And we need to acknowledge that. And then is there that question, and it's about questions, is what is my responsibility as an individual to support a culturally safe workplace? It's a question that we need to ask all the time. If we move then to the organization and the workplace level, it really is how we can create these safe spaces and opportunities to celebrate those plural identities that go beyond the traditional kind of cultural identity. And I always mentioned to my students that issue of we need to move beyond the food, fashion, and festivals. You know, culture that is important, of course, and food is a great way of celebrating diversity, but we cannot stop there. You know, diversity and those plural identities also mean that we need to celebrate and value the knowledge, the lived experience of people that have come from other lands, and the qualifications that they got there as well, and the work experience from there. This country, as Lisa mentioned, in terms of some of the stats, still we are wasting the human capital of so many people in this country when we need those skills. The other issue is that acknowledge that in an organizational setting, there will be conflict, and we need to create safe spaces where we need to talk about this conflict, these issues of tension and misunderstanding, cultural misunderstanding, and we need to have spaces where we are openly talking about those issues. If we hide issues, that's not going to be solved, you know. We need to be upfront and really tackle those issues, creating safe spaces to discuss those disagreements and misunderstandings. And as Lisa mentioned as well, having the right policies and processes, gender equity, fair recruitment policies. A key question that I always ask when I'm talking to some organizations is that issue of, oh, look, we employ the best people. We employ the best people, and sometimes that focus on the best people is the qualifications only. Well, actually, the lived experience should be an important part of any job description, because the lived experience brings so many things to the workplace. And it's not only a qualification in a university. Lived experience and an additional work experience overseas should be equally important as well. And then finally, moving to the issue of community and society, I think as leaders, we have a role in terms of advocacy, of really uniting with others to advocate and change the public narrative. And we are seeing that now, sadly, you know. I've been here for 28 years, and every electoral cycle, every time we are close to an election, can be a state election sometimes, but mostly federal election, this issue of migrants and refugees and those others, and we are othering between 20 and 40% of the population, of our population, because there are people born overseas, but also born here from parents who were born overseas. So that issue of othering really is impacting on this narrative. And now it's very dangerous because we are combining this issue of immigration and being a migrant with now is that issue of lack of housing, and then lack of access to GPs, and then traffic congestion, and then now crime and criminals. It's a very dangerous narrative, and we need to strongly, as leaders, advocate against that. Our workplace sometimes is a reflection of society, but at the same time, if we create a workplace that is culturally safe, we can also reflect that into society and change society. So it's both ways. And I think I want to finish finally with this issue of the public perception in terms of, in this country, in my experience and working with many people from migrant and refugee background, there is still this mentality that you can only get a job if you speak perfect English. And I think we need to challenge that, because there are jobs that you can do with a moderate level of English, and you then learn the language on the job. In my experience, you really learn the language is on the job. You know, it's working with other people. And then the question is not how well you speak the language, is tell me what things you do. Tell me what are your skills that you can contribute to the place. I think as workplaces, we have a key responsibility to really further support people learning the language. I'm not saying that you can get to a job, any job with a low level of English. I'm saying is that there is no need to have a perfect English to do some of the roles, and then the responsibility of your places to really support the language development as well. So that's what I wanted to discuss or to contribute in the panel today. Thank you so much.
Thank you to you. Lots of great insights there. I love your points around plural identities. I think most of us will be able to relate to that in some way, but some much more so than others. And that was a really good point, and a great reminder to all of us as we do head into the political, what is, you know, the more active part of the political cycle, of how that impacts our colleagues in workplaces, and how some of those broader conversations in society can really influence the way people are feeling and how welcome or included they're feeling in their workplaces. I love your point there about, you know, that so many of us are wasting human capital, and that's absolutely true, because we limit the way that we consider they might be useful to us in the workplaces. And a lot of people out there who are greatly skilled with values that we could really leverage from, particularly in this sector, who are working in jobs that may not be satisfying to them just because they haven't been given a chance elsewhere. So lots of fantastic reminders there. And I really like how, well, and I'm sure this has been set up intentionally, but the way Lucretia has been speaking about that organisational support for employees. And I love how you then honed in on what our individual responsibilities are as we move about the world and within organisations. And it leads really neatly into Jenny, and what Jenny's going to be talking about is how, as managers, we support that process. So Jenny, what are some of the practical ways that managers in their roles, people who are providing supervision to people who are absolutely having an influence on the way that the team dynamic is set up, how are some of the ways they can practically set their team up for success?
Thanks so much, Stacey, and Lucretia and Ignacio. Thank you so much for your comments. They certainly feed into the conversation we're going to have. As a Bundjalung woman, I also want to acknowledge that I'm on Turrbal Yagara country and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are listening and dialing in today. So thank you for the opportunity to be here. I actually spent this morning talking to a group of people from Rotary about conscious leadership. And so this is a really beautiful segue into the discussion around intentionality, right? Which is kind of what Lucretia and Ignacio have been talking about. And I think to start, when we're talking about practical ways, it starts with being intentional with your actions. So understanding what you're doing and what the impact of that's going to be, and thinking about that as a leader or a manager or someone who's in that decision-making role to develop policies and practices. What are we trying to achieve with the actions or the policy we're creating, and what is going to be the impact of that? And sometimes from a practical perspective, we develop policies or strategies as a knee-jerk reaction to society or the environment, or in some cases that political will. And we haven't really thought through the full impact of that. So I think from the starting, really, and talking around that intentionality, making sure we understand what the impact of our actions are going to be at the start, I think is a really great way for to set our organisations up for success. So whether it's cultural safety, diversity, inclusion, and the conversation that Lisa mentioned earlier about everybody's responsibility to do those things to build that cultural safety and build a psychologically safe workplace, starts with a recognition of our role and responsibilities as humans, right? Conversation Ignacio was talking then just made me think of a piece. We employ people for what they can do. So we look at so from a practical perspective, we look at their CVs, we say this person has great experience, qualifications, look at what they've done. And so that's going to fit my role now. What we often don't consider, and this is to Ignacio's point about language and experience, we don't consider what they can do in our organisation, or what their future potential might be. So in terms of a practicality and creating environments that are safe for people, or really strong well-being focused organisations, employing people for their potential and that untapped potential, and using their experience and that richness of their whole self to identify what they may become within your organisation. So switching that recruitment and that employment process from a lag indicator to a future potential indicator, essentially, I think is one way we start to explore people for their whole being. And we shift from human doing to human beings, and we start to see who the person is and what they can bring to us. And in doing so, I think that enables us and empowers us to say, well, what are the experiences, the knowledge, and your perception, your perspectives, and your lenses that you're bringing to our workplace that's going to make us a richer place to be? That allows us to step aside from the conversation around your English isn't perfect, to Ignacio's point, to say, I understand your experience from your culture and history, and your perspective is going to create a space for us to learn and grow. And I think Lucretia talked to that earlier in terms of the different ways her organisation is really embracing and checking in with people and understanding how they're feeling in the organisation. That requires us to value feelings and emotions, right? That requires us as managers and leaders to say, we value you as a human being. We value that you're going to have ups and downs. We value that and recognize that you are going to have responses to the way people behave. So how do we make sure we manage that effectively? How do we educate our teams and our leaders to identify some of those microaggressions and train that out of them where we can, provide them an alternative space? One of the things from a practical perspective, we often talk about what we shouldn't do, and we set up training about do not do this. But unless we replace it with something, and I really love that Lisa provided examples of what we replace it with. So we recognize microaggressions, but we then need to give something in its place so people will have a learned behavior, so they don't just kind of have a vacuum, because otherwise they'll go back to what they know, which is those negative and often, harmful behaviors. So as leaders, that goes to that strengths-based lens, essentially. What do you bring to the table? What are you going to add value to our team? And how do we leverage that? And I feel as leaders, we so focus sometimes on the doing part, on the tasks that we need to do, on the outputs and the outcomes we're focused on. We're not looking at the methodology and the way that we deliver it. We're not focused on how we work to be more effective. How do we do that to create the outcomes and the outputs that we want that's going to work for the individual? And I see this a lot, particularly with that, the old school lens of introverted, extroverted, but or to Ignacio's point about plural identity, understanding how I want to work and how I like to work and what's going to make me a better worker in your team is critical from a leadership perspective. And again, that requires us to step outside and see the whole self and cultural safety from my lens in a very simple way, saying, I feel safe to be me. I feel safe to show up and have my opinions, despite that I'm an Aboriginal woman. So often I resonate mostly with Lisa's comment about being the only person in the space, and I'm sure Lucretia does too, and Ignacio. And there are many people on the call, I feel, who will relate to that at some point in their career, whether they're the first person in their family to go to school, or the first person, to get a doctorate, or their first person to become a manager. Those first weigh on us, not just inside the role, but outside our role in the community as well. And so there's that understanding that it's not just what we do at work, it's what we do outside work, and that broader impact that influences how we behave in a workplace, that influences how we're going to show up. So I think that conversation around, flexibility, particularly Lucretia mentioned that, demonstrating flexibility as a leader and working with our teams, even if you've got a team of 100 people, learn how to delegate that through your team and find people within your team who are going to support the other people, because the reality is no one manager manages 100 people. We have people that we work with to do that and build their skills up. So providing flexibility around how people want to work, recognizing those uniquenesses of individuals and bring that into the workplace and leverage that. Use and utilize that and showcase and celebrate those differences rather than trying to create homogeneity in our workplace so that we all work the same way in our same box at the same time in the same way. And I really value Lisa's discussion around that earlier around not only having to be full-time work. We know that no longer exists. The standard work hours or the standard ways of being and working are no longer standard. COVID, as tragic as it was, gave us that blessing of recognizing that we can bring so many different ways to work and create safety and flexibility while also getting really great production outcomes and hitting those KPIs that you need. So I think fundamentally recognizing that, we have to look at our staff and our teams as human beings, not just humans that do stuff for us, recognizing those differences and leveraging them where we can, and really looking at it through that strengths-based lens.
Thanks so much, Jenny. Love your comments there about seeing the whole self, and a lot for organisations to think about how we actually design roles and adapt the work to suit the humans that actually are doing the work. And one of my reflections during COVID, when a lot of people were working from home and we got glimpses into people's homes that hadn't been set up to be working from home. A lot of people didn't actually have a home office at that point, although I think most new builds now definitely have a home office built into them to cater for working from home. But it was a real insight into people's lives, and really it was, in a way, for many people, a forced sharing of kind of their personal life. And I think some of us experienced a bit of like now my colleagues actually can know more about me, and that's actually okay for me to have a child at home, or I've got this going on, or or intergenerational living. Actually, my parents live with me, or whatever it is that was happening. But I think just, for me, that was a reflection of even just a turning point for me in sharing more of my whole self with colleagues and feeling comfortable to do that.
I think, Stacey, it's a really great reflection, and particularly, and this is for me. I love artwork. There's always different art behind me. That's how I kind of play around with, and I'm constantly moving. And I had this conversation as someone who's working from home. Is my background, is the space I'm in, going to distract from my conversation? And to your point, I actually like that sometimes we don't get an opportunity to share a lot about us, but by simply having that glimpse of your office or your dog coming up and seeing you, we all remember the video of the man on the news reporter with his child coming into his room and sneaking out the back trying to get her out of the room as the babysitter came. But that showed us that we were human beings, right? I think that's the piece. I think the shift that we've been able to see is that we're, as leaders and managers, we need to continue that conversation, say, oh, that's right, you don't just do a thing for me Monday to Friday, you have a life. And whether or not I'm interested in it, I'm not saying that everybody has to be interested in every one of their employees. I jokingly say to people, I have task empathy. I have so much going on in my head. I'm there for my staff with whatever they need. Outside that, I'm kind of too busy, and I'm really open about that. But if people know and work with me, they know that it's not me being trying to be too task focused and not interested in people. I am deeply interested in the people who I work with and I impact, and I want to know what I can do for them. So if they want me to talk about their kids, I'll talk about their kids. But naturally, am I going to do that? No. So I think recognizing that, though, allows us to be better leaders and better managers, and that takes a little bit of work. And sometimes people go, I don't want to do that extra bit.
Really good points. And another saying I think about, and the saying was first developed to apply to women, but I think we can think about it for all parents, that often parents are expected to parent as though they don't work, but work as though they don't have kids. It's impossible. You can't do that. And so it's just another example of, for people come to work with their real life going on, and adaptability when it comes to roles and how we integrate people's whole selves into the workplace doesn't need to be to the detriment of the organisation or the work to be done. Not at all saying that, you just let anything go, but that we have built in adaptability and flexibility into the way that people can do their roles, and that will apply in so many different contexts, whether or not it's to accommodate business, if it's to accommodate family responsibilities, whatever it is, that we've had some pre-thought to the fact that people are humans coming to work to do their work, and they will need adaptability in the way that they do that. So thanks so much, Jenny.
Thanks, Stacey.
We are wrapping up now. We're starting to get to the end of this session. So I do encourage, if you have any comments to make, please make them. If you've got any questions for either Lisa or the panelists, to pop them into the chat. But I did want to give you some information about the next session coming up. As I mentioned, this was part 4 of a 5-part series. The next session will be on Thursday, the 27th of June. Now, this topic will be all about performance management and navigating adjustments and support and expectations. So a really good, today's been a really good segue to that conversation. How do you actually do that when you're supervising people, and how do you support that in your own workplaces? So that's going to be something that we will be delving into on the 27th of June. Now, just a reminder that the post-event email will be sent out with the slides and the resources, and those resources will include a bystander and upstander guide and a psychosocial hazards tip sheet for all of you. So keep an eye out for that. And all of the resources for all of the sessions are on the website for you to have a look at now. So you can go to the QCOS Supporting Diverse Workforces landing page, and you'll find all of the content from this series as well as last year's there. Thank you so much for your time today. We do have a poll that will be coming up on your screen now to see how you found the session. Please let us know how you found the session this morning. We'd love to hear more from you, and we hope to see you again towards the end of June for the final session. Thanks again to Lisa, to Lucretia, Ignacio and Jenny for all of your invaluable insights on this topic today. It was really great to hear from you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Stacey.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Please do the poll before you pop off, and we hope to see you in June. If you can believe it, June.
Crazy.
Time to start Christmas shopping.
And happy Reconciliation Week, everybody.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jenny. Thanks, Alison. Thanks for coming. Nice to see you, Bonnie. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks again, Jenny. That was great.
Thank you very much. That was really great. The conversation was amazing. Yeah, the conversation from Lisa and Ignacio and Lucretia was really great. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much. And we hope to work with you again.
Definitely. Oh, I'm going to try and pop in on the 27th for that one, actually. So
great.
I'll look for that email because I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. So that would be awesome.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
Yeah, we'd love to have you.
I'll pop you in the event.
Oh, thank you.
So you'll get a link. Yeah.
Thank
awesome.
you so much. Well, take care. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
You too.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so
Bye.
much. Bye.